here today. Those are Women and Children First, the Northern Beaches Women's Shelter, Women's Resilience Centre, and former Detective Sergeant and I believe the member for Wakehurst's aunt, Beth Seedsman. You're all very welcome to this debate here today. And now I call the member for Wakehurst to move his motion.
Thank you, Speaker. I move that this House, 1, notes that Saturday 25 November is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and the 6th annual Let's End Domestic Violence Vigil is being held this Friday night outside Customs House from 4 to 5. 2, recognises domestic and family violence remains prevalent within society. 6 women were killed across Australia over a 10-day period in October 2023. 3, calls on the New South Wales Government to A, consider increasing funding for specialist domestic and family violence services, B, finalise the New South Wales Primary Prevention Strategy and to fund primary prevention services and programs, C, investigate expanding the Staying Home Leaving Violence program, D, work with the federal government to create more incentives for private homeowners and property investors to rent their properties to victims of domestic violence. I move this public interest debate today to draw attention to the scourge of domestic violence we face here in New South Wales and indeed across the country. This is a non-political, bipartisan call to action to eliminate domestic violence, full stop. It is timely that we turn our minds to this very serious topic. Firstly, the month of October saw a spike in deaths associated with domestic violence. Recent incidents included the tragic murder of Lily James, a 21-year-old working at St Andrew's Cathedral School, of which members will be all too aware. Secondly, Saturday 25 November is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. The 6th annual Let's End Domestic Violence Vigil is being held this Friday night outside Customs House, as mentioned, between 4 and 5, and I do encourage everyone to attend. The shocking death toll is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to domestic violence. In 2022, over 33,000 domestic violence-related assault incidents were recorded by the New South Wales Police Force, and that's before intimidation, stalking and harassment are included, or the unknowable, but certainly high, amount of unreported abuse. In 2016, an estimated 17% of Australian women aged 18 years and over, or 1.6 million women, had experienced violence by a partner known to them since the age of 15 years. In the 5 years to December 2021, 43% of all New South Wales murders were domestic violence related. There are shocking figures, and across our state, rural, regional and metro, but statistics cannot communicate the weight of the human suffering caused by domestic violence, which is hiding in plain sight in every single electorate across this state. It's only when you hear individual stories and experience of the police and specialist domestic violence providers on the ground that you come to understand the gravity and urgency of this crisis. My interest in the topic comes from my exposure and admiration for the work of specialist domestic violence services on the beaches through the many dedicated organisations that operate cooperatively as the Northern Beaches Domestic Violence Network. And I welcome leaders from that network here today. And I'd also like to acknowledge Delia Donovan, CEO, and the staff of the Domestic Violence New South Wales, the peak body for specialist domestic and family violence services in New South Wales, who are joining us online. Service providers tell me that the women's refuges, where women and children go to escape violent households, are always full. Women and Children First, for example, whose service Northern Sydney, are funded to support 208 women per year, but last year assisted 836. Just 4 months into the 2024 financial year, and they've already assisted 220 women. Now, this doesn't include separately the Northern Beaches Women's Shelter down the road. So in listening to service providers, I hear devastating stories of women being brutally, physically abused, psychologically abused, often for years and years. The plight of children in these circumstances breaks one's heart. And when they leave, they face enormous practical and emotional challenges of finding accommodation, navigating the criminal justice system and rebuilding their lives when the cost of living is so sky high. That is not how we should treat women or children in modern Australia. The prevalence of domestic violence is a national disgrace. But being outraged is not enough. Federal and state governments must deliver solutions commensurate with the scale of the problem. And our specialist domestic and family violence services are, in my opinion, critically underfunded. And the New South Wales Government, in addition with our federal government, needs to step up. Stopping domestic violence starts by raising our kids in a culture that supports healthy, respectful relationships and respect for women. This is a shared task for all parents, teachers and adult role models. Most importantly, this involves leading by example. This includes the language and behaviour we use here in Parliament. But clearly, the state has a crucial role in playing to eliminate domestic violence. A comprehensive response must address all stages outlined in the National Plan to end violence against women and children. 1, prevention. 2, early intervention. 3, response. 4, recovery and healing. The New South Wales Government is yet to release a standalone primary prevention strategy due by the end of this year. And today I'm calling on the government to finalise that strategy and also commit to providing funding primary prevention services and programs across New South Wales. Because Domestic Violence New South Wales has recently called for $20 million investment for domestic and family violence prevention initiatives. An effective support at the time of crisis directly saves lives, and I welcome the Core and Cluster program, which is delivering additional secure housing and specialist support, including on the beaches. Tranche 2 of the program has recently been open for applications, and I note the concern among the sector about how successful applicants are being decided. This significant investment should go to specialist domestic and family violence services. I have requested a meeting with the Minister to discuss this more at length. And I want to take a moment to talk here about the Staying Home Leaving Violence program run out of New South Wales Department of Community and Justice. That program flips the paradigm that the victim must leave the family home to escape abuse by working in cooperation with the New South Wales Police to actually remove the perpetrator. That means the woman can stay in her home and maintain connections to schools, family and community. Surely that's the best outcome. And the success of this program has been widely acknowledged, including as recently as last week when it received an honourable mention at the Premier's Awards for Excellence in Service Delivery. Now, unfortunately, the Staying Home Leaving Violence program only operates in some parts of the state. I've added my voice to calls to have this transformational program expanded, including in Northern Sydney, and that's why I've mentioned it specifically in today's debate. If refuges are full, if finding an affordable rental is next to impossible, as it is on the beaches and elsewhere in Sydney and across the regions as well, then we are at the options for women suffering. So what are the options for women suffering in oppressive, dangerous relations? The Staying Home Leaving Violence program model offers genuine and better pathways. It should be accessible for all women and children across the state. For victims to recover and to heal, they need security. Long-term housing is key to this, and I think there is real scope for more creativity in how we incentivise private homeowners and property investors to preferentially rent properties to women fleeing domestic violence. And I urge the government to work with the federal government to consider tax incentives that will facilitate this. We must all step up to fix domestic violence. This is a crisis. Members of Parliament have an important role to play in making sure constituents know where they get support, advocating for this need to be met in our communities and holding a government to account. That's what I hope to do today with this public interest debate.
The question is the motion be agreed to. I call the Minister and Member for Charlestown.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak in support of this public interest debate moved by the Member for Wakehurst, and I acknowledge the member's passion in this particular area. I've had multiple discussions and they've been really good discussions, so I really thank you for your advocacy. I also want to recognise the really hard work of the people in the gallery and thank them for the work that they do in keeping victim survivors safe and advocating. I know that it's incredibly hard work and I know that it is we really need to make sure that what we do is we flip the whole way that we deal with domestic violence on its head. Only by doing that will we actually combat domestic and family violence. I also thank the member for raising the profile of the two key events which are fast approaching. The Let's End Domestic Violence Vigil outside Customs House, which is being held this Friday, and the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women on the 25th of November, this Saturday, which signals the start of the 16 days of activism against gendered violence, which is an international way of raising this issue and making sure that people actually have domestic and family and sexual violence at the front of their mind at least for 16 days every year, and I think it should be every day, every moment of every day. So it's actually timely that we're speaking on how we can eliminate domestic, family and sexual violence from our communities. The New South Wales Government is tackling this scourge, and it is a word that's used fairly often, the word scourge, and I would like to really find a word that is much stronger, but it's hard to, in multiple ways, and we're tackling it through including by keeping victim survivors safe from the threat of violence and by changing the behaviour of perpetrators and holding them accountable. Firstly, holding perpetrators accountable, and I note that today the Attorney General has second-read some legislation in this place to change the High Risk Offenders Act, which will ensure that strangulation is considered a serious violent offence and puts serious non-fatal strangulation in the same category as murder, manslaughter and intentionally inflicting grievous bodily harm. Perpetrators serving a period of imprisonment for serious non-fatal strangulation would be able to continue to be detained or monitored even after their sentence has been served. And we know that prior attempted non-lethal strangulation is one of the strongest predictors of subsequent homicide, and it actually increases the risk by 700%. Too many lives have been lost to domestic violence. And as the member for Wakehurst has said in his motion, 6 women across Australia were killed in a 10-day period last month. That is a deeply disturbing and confronting number. And to shift those numbers, we need to increase the focus on prevention. Prevention programs are really key to changing the violent behaviour of perpetrators and ending the cycle of violence. So to do that, there are programs currently like the Tackling Violence program, the Make No Doubt program. There's a series of men's behaviour change programs, and there's certainly engagement with schools through the curriculum. But importantly, as the member for Wakehurst raised, we're working on the New South Wales Primary Prevention Strategy that is currently undergoing consultation with stakeholders. This government is absolutely committed to seeing that strategy finalised and being released. We need to make sure that it's well consulted and that it has the support of people who are working in the sector. The member's motion also refers to ways of keeping victims safe from perpetrators, and everyone deserves to feel safe and secure. This government is investing heavily to ensure victim survivors can live safely, and as the member referred to, we're delivering core and cluster refuges for victim survivors and children fleeing violence. The first 2 tranches are underway. There's 39 projects under contract at the moment. Once all 3 tranches are fully delivered, we'll be supporting more than 2,900 women and children fleeing domestic and family violence each and every year. We are also importantly focusing on our response to ensure that all government systems and programs are working in harmony. A few weeks ago, I announced that we are creating the first standalone New South Wales Women's Safety Commissioner. Dr. Hannah Tonkin has recently been appointed. She will be at the heart of our response to making sure that it is a whole of government response. I again thank the member for bringing this debate to the Parliament, and I look forward to continuing having this conversation. It's a very, very important one.
The question is the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Hawkesbury.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I want to thank the member for Wakehurst for bringing this debate to the chamber, and can I acknowledge those visitors in the chamber who are listening with intent as well. Domestic violence is an ongoing issue that has many tentacles, and I know that the previous Liberal National Government was focused on improving the lives of women who, through no fault of their own, were subjected to the scourge of domestic violence. The statistics are disturbing. As of the 31st of October 2023, 58 women have been killed in domestic violence incidents this year. That is 1 woman killed every 5.25 days this year. Domestic violence and family violence also cost the economy $22 billion per year. Women who experience domestic and family violence are also more likely to have lower incomes, fragmented work history, and to be employed in part-time or casual work. It was the previous Liberal National Government that introduced the first standalone offence for coercive control, the first in the country. This was the result of extensive consultation and a public exposure draft which received almost 200 submissions. The Leader of the Opposition, Mark Speakman, in his capacity as Attorney-General at the time, spearheaded the bill to criminalise coercive control in intimate partner relationships. And I want to also acknowledge the contribution from Natalie Ward, who at the time, who's in the upper house now, but at the time was the former Minister for Domestic Violence. And I also want to acknowledge our Minister for Domestic Violence here today as well, and thank you for being in the chamber. Coercive control is a form of domestic abuse that involves patterns of behaviour that have the cumulative effect of denying victim survivors their autonomy, and their independence. It is a proven precursor to domestic violence deaths. Our community has grieved with the families of too many domestic violence homicide victims. Their perpetrators of domestic violence use this insidious behaviour as a means of control over their victims. It can include controlling behaviour, denying access to friends and family or financial resources, and even abuse of pets and animals as a form of control. With the continued increase in domestic violence, continued and increased support from government is essential. So I support the member for Wakehurst's push for increased funding for specialist domestic and family violence services.
Speaker, can I suggest we stop the clock for a minute?
We will stop the clock.
Thank you, Speaker.
Take your time, Member for Hawkesbury.
Anyone want a glass of water?
Yeah. No, that's okay. That's right. Thank you.
Beverage, anyone?
Speaker, I'm feeling the love in the room. Locally in Hawkesbury, there are a number of organisations for the support of those subject to domestic violence. These include the Women's Cottage, Strong Nation Community Service, Link Wentworth, Newreen Hawkesbury Women's Associations and Support. There are also many other organisations which assist victims such as Lifeline, Respect National Helpline, Women's Crisis Line and Relationships Australia. It's a well-known fact that in times of financial hardship, the rate of domestic violence increases. The cost of living crisis, which is currently afflicting the Australian population, only serves to exacerbate the circumstances under which domestic violence raises its ugly head. The previous Liberal National Government assisted vulnerable individuals by supporting programs that support victims to be able to stay in their own home, removing the offender, not the victim, providing paid leave for victims, again an initiative introduced by the previous coalition government, committing an additional $69.6 million in the last budget for services that support victims, survivors of domestic and family violence. In fact, the 2021-22 budget invested $204.9 million in specialist domestic family violence. So the track record of the coalition government needs to be matched by this government. I know we all want to work together on this. I know we all want to find a solution. The fact that we have a gentleman coming to this chamber introducing this public interest debate and the conversation we had before we came to speak, and if you look at the physicality of the member for Wakehurst and me as the member for Hawkesbury, there's an obvious difference in physicality. There's an obvious awareness of frailty and dominance and the impact that sometimes have on people that have perhaps been subjected to this type of condition in the past. It stays with them forever. They can't close the door on that, but I want to today thank the member for Wakehurst for shining a light on such an important issue in this state. Thank you.
Thank the member for Hawkesbury. The question is the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Shellharbour.
Thank you, Speaker. First, I would also like to acknowledge the member for Wakehurst for bringing this public interest debate to this place. Speaker, the word for, I guess, domestic violence is really domestic terrorism. That's the wording, and that's what it means to those who have been abused. Back in 2018, I studied for 2 years and researched an appropriate bill to bring to this place to criminalise coercive control. 2 years of research. I finally did bring a bill to this place, only for that bill to be knocked over by those opposite for unintended consequences. And the conversation I had with the Attorney General, now the member for Cronulla and the opposition leader, advised me that he didn't have an appetite to criminalise coercive control in New South Wales. So it was a very good and comprehensive, well-researched document that those opposite decided that they would not support. So what they did instead was to water it down. And they watered it down after a joint select committee was put together, of which I was a part of, with 23 recommendations and 6 findings. And since 2020, not one of those recommendations was implemented by those opposite. Not one of those findings was implemented by those opposite. There was no extra funding given to any services anywhere in New South Wales. This document was put in a drawer, the drawer was shut, and that's where it stayed. I'm going to table this document again this afternoon for those opposite to have another look. Speaker, I believe that we need to strengthen the existing coercive control bill in this place. We need to have mandatory sentencing around it. We need to ensure that the perpetrators are in fact removed from homes. Why are women and children being removed from their family home? Why are children being taken out of their schools that they know where their friends are and their teachers and put somewhere where they know nobody in a foreign place? It is time that we now change that and ensure that the perpetrator is removed and is never allowed to come near that woman or those children until treatment or it's gone through the court system. I spoke to hundreds and hundreds of women while I was researching my bill. I looked at best practice in every single Commonwealth country that I could and looked at the Scottish model, which was the gold standard at the time. And we had the opportunity in New South Wales to be able to do that. But what did we get instead? Again, a watered down version. No mandatory sentencing, no teeth around a good piece of legislation, and no extra funding. So far, since we've been in government, and we've only been in government for 8 months, we have doubled the funding for every women's centre right across New South Wales. Doubled it. And that will be recurrent funding. That was the first important step that we did as a responsible government, and it is appropriate. And to add to that, I have been working with Sally Stevenson from the Illawarra Women's Health Centre on the first publicly funded trauma recovery centre, not just in New South Wales, not just in Australia, but the world. And that is now happening. We have got the site, the centre is being built, it is set to open within the next few months, and this will be a model that we can roll out right across New South Wales and right across Australia. And that is appropriate. That is appropriate. It is a one-stop shop where victims and survivors can get the treatment that they need, and their children can get the treatment that they deserve. And that is appropriate. That in 2023 in New South Wales should be happening right across New South Wales. And I actually salute and thank Sally and her team for their hard work. This has not just happened, it's 5 to 6 years worth of hard work. But we got there because we badgered governments, not only here in New South Wales, but federally with a $25 million grant, and it can be done.
Before I call the member for Cootamundra, the member for Shellharbour asked to table a document. We can leave it on the table for members, or did you seek leave to formally table it? Leave it on the table, excellent. All right. No. I call the member for Cootamundra.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for Wakehurst for bringing this motion to the House today. No one should live their life in fear. But for victims of domestic and family violence, this is a reality that they face on a daily basis. It's not limited to one group or culture, gender or sexuality. It can affect family members and intimate partners right across our communities, causing physical and psychological damage, intergenerational violence, and in some cases contributes to homelessness. It's an insidious cancer on our society, infecting our social fabric by disguising itself in a way that can make it hard for outsiders to detect and for victims to prove. Physical abuse is often the most visible form, but domestic and family violence has many guises, including emotional, psychological, financial, sexual, social, verbal, spiritual, elder, and child abuse. We as a society have come a long way when it comes to shining a light on this issue, but there's always more to be done. I'm certainly pleased to see the New South Wales Labor government taking the same zero tolerance approach as the previous government. The former coalition government certainly understood the need for ongoing and eternal vigilance in this space, and our work sent a very strong message that enough is enough. Premier Dominic Perrottet in October of 2021 committed $484.3 million, the single largest investment in tackling domestic and family violence in the state's history. I was a member of the Joint Select Committee on Coercive Control established by the previous government at the direction of the former Attorney General and now Leader of the Opposition, Mark Speakman. Coercive control is complex, it is sinister and causes untold harm for its victims. Coercive control is a form of domestic abuse that involves patterns of behaviour which have the cumulative effect of denying victim survivors their autonomy and independence. What I heard as a member of that committee was confronting. It triggered in me a broad range of emotions, from sadness to sheer outrage that a person can inflict such torture on another human being. My feelings soon turned to respect for the brave witnesses who shared their stories with us in the hope of making life better for others, because it's only through having these conversations and bringing the issue out into the daylight that we expose the perpetrators and free the victims from their cycle of violence. One of the victims' stories we heard was Sam's. Sam went to bed at night. Her partner would secretly put an electronic sound device under the house so that she could hear noises like constant knocking, ringing, and even a baby crying. When she asked her partner about it, he called her crazy. Needless to say, Sam suffered severe paranoia and anxiety, and as a result of this, severe psychological abuse. Another form of coercive control is financial dependence. Coercive and controlling behaviours, like limiting a partner's income, not only cuts victims off from their support networks, but also makes it much harder for victims to leave abusive relationships. Another victim's story we heard during the inquiry process was from Talia. Talia was financially independent before she met her partner. Before long, her partner convinced Talia to quit her job and forbid her from working altogether, making her financially dependent on him and unable to leave. I was proud to be a member of this committee and its work, which helped inform the measures the previous coalition government undertook to stamp out this scourge. In addition to the investment I mentioned earlier, we introduced landmark law on coercive control, establishing the right to ask scheme, the expansion of the first home buyers choice scheme for women leaving a domestic violence situation. This Saturday, the 25th of November, is the International Day of Violence Against Women, and it is a timely reminder that we all have a role to play in stamping out domestic and family violence. Coercive control is a factor and a red flag for horrific and preventable atrocities, and I call on this government to remain eternally vigilant in the fight against this menace.
The question is the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Wallandilly.
Thank you, Speaker. I speak in favour of the member for Wakehurst public interest debate. And what a good man Mr. Regan is to bring this as his public debate. I think that's something that we all are a little proud of. Sadly, one woman is battered every 9 seconds, and I would like to spend 9 seconds of my time if we all think about one woman that's battered right now, and in 9 seconds there'll be another. Thank you. And if this isn't enough, there's always, as we know, the sexual and emotional violence that many people suffer. And it's not always as obvious as a black eye and is often very hidden. I still remember my daughter returning home after leaving one of her friends' place, and when she left, this friend was putting in a mouthguard and putting on multiple jumpers. And when my daughter questioned why, she knew that she was going to be beaten up that night, and she said if she put multiple jumpers on, the bruises wouldn't show so much. When I think about my specific area, and I talk to the convener of the Camden-Wallandilly Domestic Violence Committee, that wonderful and amazing Tanya Whitehouse, I'm horrified that the Macarthur Women's Domestic Violence Court Advocacy Service received the highest referrals in all of New South Wales from police for domestic violence incidents they attend every month. They are almost always the highest receiver of the serious threat matters, the women most at risk, also for the entire state. If we aren't the first, we're second or third, and it's not a very proud place to put ourselves. The statistics in Macarthur have never decreased, and there is not enough funding to cover their workload. They have extra workers funded through alternative means, not through government funding. This alternative funding is not ongoing, and the workload is horrendous, yet they never have a waiting list because they never turn anyone away. Somehow they manage. Other domestic violence services at some point throughout the year, and some on several occasions, will have a waiting list and won't accept ones, but the ones in Macarthur always find a space. In this house, it's really interesting being an independent, and I really don't want to particularly hear about the political parties. I know you've all worked hard on this before and what you've done before, but I look forward to working together for a solution. I think we all have that in our heart. We can speak out, we can educate, but the most positive action we can take is to get those suffering, is to enhance the ability of these women into stable housing as just a start. And I agree, this is a wonderful, great public interest debate. Thank you.
Speaker.
The question is the motion be agreed to. As this is a crossbench public interest debate, I'm going to call the member for Balmain, but the member for Oxley will be able to seek leave, and I'm sure leave will be granted.
Thank you, Speaker. I rise to speak on behalf of the Greens in support of this critical issue, and I'd like to thank the member for Wakehurst for bringing this to the House. Every woman has a fundamental right to feel safe and to be free from violence, whether they're at home, at work, or walking alone at night. But we know that for many women across New South Wales and across Australia, that is not their reality. As many of the other members have acknowledged already, as of Friday last week, 49 women had been killed in Australia this year. That's one woman being killed every 5 days. Of these women, 23 were allegedly killed by a male intimate or ex-intimate partner. Now, these horrific numbers should drive us to urgent action. And so far, we are yet to see the sort of investment really needed in frontline domestic violence services in this state. The recent budget approved by the government does not reflect the gravity of the situation faced by women experiencing domestic and family violence here in New South Wales. And while there is heavy investment in things like more police on our streets, there seems to be a reluctance to put sufficient ongoing funding behind the evidence-based programs that we know really work and the initiatives that women in our community so desperately need. There has been a failure over many years to recognise that we are facing a crisis of men's violence against women. Now, as a mother, I don't want my daughter or my sons to grow up in a world where one woman is being murdered by a man every 5 days. It is horrifying and unacceptable, and we must do better. If we're to turn this tide and work to end men's violence against women, then we must start by investing funding to support evidence-based programs and initiatives that help those on the front line and to help prevent future violence. Now, the calls for the member for Wakehurst to consider increasing funding for specialist domestic violence services should be supported. In particular, I would call on the government to urgently increase funding for specialist women's legal services and community legal centres across New South Wales to meet the multiple and complex needs of women and children experiencing violence. including services targeted specifically towards First Nations women, women living in regional, rural and remote areas, as well as women in prison. This should be done as a matter of priority. Now, we must also ensure that funding is available to help guarantee access in all regions to courts that have specialist judicial officers and prosecutors, as well as providing regular domestic and family violence and abuse training for judicial officers, prosecutors, lawyers and registrars, provide legal and non-legal support for victim survivors, and make arrangements to enhance the safety of victim survivors. Now, these frontline services require significant investment from the government. We need money to ensure that these services are being provided across the state and to ensure that we have trained staff to deliver this frontline support. Now, the proposal to investigate expanding the Staying Home Leaving Violence program is well overdue, and this is something the former government should have actioned long ago. Now, I call on the current government to fully integrate the Staying Home Leaving Violence program with the Safer Pathways reform statewide to ensure that every woman and child who is experiencing family and domestic and family violence and abuse is given the option and support to stay in their home safely, including support with safety planning, improving home security, help in managing finances, support for children, and help with legal processes. Now, this is the bare minimum that we should be doing in the face of this crisis. I hope to see all members support urgent action on this issue, and I'm sure, as we've heard across multiple parties, that everyone is taking this seriously, but it does need funding to continue to do this important work. Now, with one woman being killed by a man every 5 days, this should be treated as the urgent emergency that we know it is. We cannot continue as we are, and we must act now.
The member for Oxley seeks leave to make a contribution, and I know that following that the member for Bega will also be seeking leave to make a contribution. Is leave granted in both situations? Leave is granted. Member for Oxley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I've just been quickly changing my speech because the member for Hawkesbury encouraged me just a moment ago to tell a little bit about why a 6'5", not physically challenged male would be standing here talking about domestic violence. And there's 3 main points. Kempsey, as an LGA, is the second highest prevalence of domestic violence in New South Wales. This morning, which is number 2, I had a friend of mine spend 40 minutes on the phone to me, being worried about the next date of her court case because she's concerned that her kids may no longer be with us. And as a health professional, I have experienced infrequently, thankfully, but women coming into my room and coming around the corner and seeing the physical presence of me and realising that the door's closing and recoiling. Now, I don't think I'm that abhorrent, but I'd like to cheekily think that I'm a Picasso, but it is time and time again the response of someone that cannot deal with something in their past just by the physical presence. And that, for one, makes me want to speak about it today. Today, as we cast our thoughts towards the solemn observance of our International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, our hearts are heavy with a weight of duty and resolve. This Friday, as the dusk unfurls its crimson shroud over Customs House, many Australians in person and from around the country, including my electorate of Oxley, will stand in unity as we look to put an end to domestic violence. The numbers from the most recent Bosca statistics tell a story that compels us to listen. Last year, Kempsey experienced 295 domestic violence-related assaults, along with 382 in Port Macquarie Hastings, which I share with a member for Port Macquarie. These are small communities, but they are not small numbers. These figures, they jump out at me as each one is a plea for help and a confirmation that we must do more. The ABS Personal Safety Survey shows of 2013 shows 21% of women living outside of the capital cities, compared to 15% of women in capital cities, have experienced violence from an intimate partner after the age of 15. Although the trends in my community from 2018 to 2022 are described as mostly stable, these terrible statistics showed Nambucca and Port Macquarie Hastings experienced a 9% increase over that period. With the amount of awareness, funding and programs that are spent on domestic violence year on year, this is not the statistic we should be seeing. It is one thing for the numbers to remain stable. It's heartbreaking to see them go up, when we as a country need to see 0. We need to dig deeper and examine the social causes that contribute to these disturbing statistics. Drug and alcohol abuse is a common denominator among domestic violence offenders. Accessibility to drug and alcohol rehab centres is insufficient in regional communities, and appropriate housing for men released on parole is not generally available. They are released back into the community, often causing their victims to pack up and flee for their own safety. The New South Wales Government has a duty to extend its protective services to towns and villages in regional and rural New South Wales. The women of Oxley, and indeed all women, deserve nothing less than a guarantee of safety and support. It is time we translated our commitments into concrete actions that reduce violence in regional communities and protect the women who need it the most. To this end, the member for Wakehurst is correct. We must enhance the specialist services across the state, especially in regional communities, and this needs to be resourced within the police force, but also the health and community service teams that are often crucial in providing first response and support to escape toxic situations for women that are faced with these right situations. We need more frontline workers that are trained and equipped with the skills and necessary understanding to deal with the complexities of domestic violence. Women's refuges in regional areas are under huge pressure and cannot cope with the demand from women made homeless by their need to escape from a violent partner. Financial pressures and high housing costs mean that many women suffer in silence, too scared to leave their homes for fear of having to sleep in their cars. To this end, I would like to call on the government to invest further in affordable housing solutions in regional and rural New South Wales. The lack of safe and available housing options can force victims to choose between abuse, homelessness, and in the region sometimes having to move towns. We can and must do better than this. By fostering partnerships with private sector and community housing providers, we can increase the availability of temporary and permanent housing solutions. My community wants this, and I, as the member for Oxley, certainly say yes please, right there in my backyard. In closing, I wish to reiterate that while we reflect on these statistics, we must always remember that behind each number is a human face, a person whose life has been irrevocably changed. As the member for Oxley, I stand here today not just to speak, but to call for action. I commend the member for Wakehurst for bringing this important issue to debate, and I urge my colleagues and the government to join this fight to do better. There is no place for any form of violence against women. Full stop.
The question is the motion be agreed to. The member for Bega seeks leave. Leave was granted. I call the member for Bega.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for granting the leave. I was unprepared really to deliver an address today, being on house duty, and have some handwritten notes, but it's such an important issue, and I commend the member for Wakehurst and thank all the members that have contributed to the debate today. Particularly want to recognise the Minister for Women and the Prevention of Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. And we've had a very emotional presentations from members on this issue. I gave my inaugural speech approximately 18 months ago and referenced personal experience, but my professional career has been in women's health for more than 30 years. And you cannot experience women's health care without acknowledging the effects of physical and psychological coercion and trauma on women, which affects their reproductive decisions, their general gynecological care, their pregnancies and their birth. And I just wanted to briefly describe what it's like to grow up in living in domestic violence. I grew up in an alcohol-induced violence of verbal abuse, coercion, broken plates and drawn knives in the kitchen, a mother who's experienced black eyes, and as a child going to bed with the blankets pulled over your head. Now, the last straw was arriving home in the Morris 1100, if anyone can remember that, back in the 60s and 70s, and there being a shooting target on the garage door. And in retrospect, I don't realise how close our family was to murder or more serious injury. But in those days, where were the police? And where were the domestic violence services? It didn't exist. And it's had a generational effect. I mean, personally, I suppose there is trauma that I deal with, but I know led my late brother to alcoholism and mental health issues, homelessness, and we lost him prematurely. So I can't speak more strongly about the need for support for women for against domestic violence and sexual assault. I know it's a bipartisan issue. It's not a gender issue. You've had 3 men 6'4", 6'5", stand up, and I commend them both for their contributions. But it is something that affects us all, can affect us all, can affect our children, and affects our women. And I know that both sides of politics will be united in trying to contribute to the development of improved resources for women experiencing domestic violence and the zero tolerance that we have to have towards this terrible condition.
The member for Strathfield seeks leave to make a contribution. Is leave granted? Leave's granted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to make a very brief contribution to this really important debate. I wholeheartedly support the proposition that we need to do much more about family and domestic and sexual violence. I had coffee with a really old friend this morning, and she described a challenging situation with her former husband where it hadn't gone violent yet, but there was a lot of verbal abuse in a very challenging situation that involved the terms of their separation and what to do with their family home. And she described verbal abuse over the phone, verbal abuse towards their kids. And as she was talking, I felt a fear come up in me that this would escalate into something unexpected, because we just see it so often. And I didn't know, because it hadn't crossed that threshold yet. It hadn't crossed the threshold into physical violence, but there was verbal abuse over the phone. And so what mechanisms, as we think about this issue, what mechanisms can we put in place to offer advice and to protect people and victims as the situation escalates, before it gets to a point where it's beyond the point of no return? That's the first point I'd like to make. The second point is, in Strathfield, which is my electorate, 30% of the residents are of Chinese background, 20% of Indian background, 3 or 4% of Korean background. We know that family and domestic and sexual violence occurs in lots of migrant communities, but it's very difficult for people to talk about it, because there are a lot of cultural barriers to it. It's considered a cultural taboo. It's considered something shameful. So people just don't talk about it. Even though there may be services that are available or offered, people are not comfortable seeking out that support. And I don't have a solution to this. I don't know, how do we create a safe environment, or how do we create that environment that's culturally appropriate, that is linguistically appropriate for women and victims from diverse backgrounds to be able to seek that support and to be able to feel safe and comfortable to seek that support, and perhaps even to understand that they need support, that they, in the first place, even understand that the behaviour that they're experiencing is not acceptable, because perhaps where they come from and the cultures from which they come from, there is a different understanding of that sort of behaviour than we have here in Australia. So as we think about this issue, I'd encourage us to consider the steps or the path, the escalation of the behaviour from its very, very beginnings and the root causes, but also how do we make sure that people from linguistically and culturally diverse backgrounds can be included in our thinking around the solutions.
The member for Pittwater has sought leave to make a contribution. Is leave granted? Leave's granted.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the member for Wakehurst for bringing this public interest debate forward this afternoon, and thank you for all members for their contributions as well. I think this is a topic which many members have different contexts and different approaches, and all of them are as equally valuable, and all of them add to the melting pot of solutions to this scourge in our society. And I also pay tribute to the members of the gallery who are here today, many from the Northern Beaches community who I know are deeply convicted in terms of their convictions on this issue and how we go about resolving it. I come at this issue from the context of my experience as a family and divorce lawyer before I entered this place. And sadly, that is the wrong end of this scourge to be involved in, because people come to you at their most broken, at their worst, at their most difficult moments in life, and one of the joys of that role is helping those people get back on their feet and get out the door to be on the way to being their best self. And I'll tell a story about a client that I had who, and I think this is an example which is all too common and despairingly so. It was an individual lady who'd been in a 30-year relationship and had been subjected to the most horrendous and horrific coercive control over many decades in her marriage, to the point where she slept behind a locked door every night. She slept with her diary in a handbag, cuddled underneath her, because she was scared of what her partner might do to her if he read what she'd been up to or seen where she'd been going, or he found her receipts for things that she might have bought. She was given an allowance each week of cash, and she couldn't spend beyond that. When she came to me and my firm as a recently separated individual, having finally had enough after finding her partner in a pool of blood and faeces at the bottom of the stairs one morning, and he was okay, but decided she'd had enough. And when she came to us, she didn't know how to use an ATM, she didn't know how to use a bank card, she didn't know how to use a mobile phone effectively, she didn't know how to do many of the things that all of us take for granted. And this is a story which I think is all too often hidden beneath the civilised society we find ourselves in, where people put on a facade as they go about their day-to-day. But I think the more we talk about this issue and the more we expose light on a dark situation, the more people will appreciate the problem that it is, and the more people that appreciate the problem that it is, the more we can turn our minds to fixing the issue and how we can actually make this not just an ongoing problem, but something that we can resolve. And for me, I think one of the biggest things we can do comes down to education. And so the more we talk about these stories and all the stories that everyone in this chamber has spoken about today, be it from a culturally diverse background or otherwise, the more we can expose our young men and women to these tragedies, the more they'll appreciate that it's not normal and it's not okay. And so I think I wholeheartedly support this motion before the House, because I know that as government commits resources, as we continue to educate young people about this, then they will make the difference tomorrow. We see so often that the changes start in our young people coming through the education system, coming through university, and that's where we've seen so many social changes come from. They've come through the youth and through the young people, and it's not going to be the older generations that lead this change, it's going to be the younger generations. And so if we can instill within our school system and instill within our young people that this behaviour is not okay, that it's not acceptable, that there is a proper and appropriate way to treat people and talk about people and conduct yourselves towards people, be they the same sex or another sex or any other gender, then to me that is the start of the journey towards ensuring that we don't just talk about the number of people who've been killed by an intimate partner, but we're talking about other issues of the day, that this will be an issue of the past and not one of the future. So I commend this motion to the House. I thank the House for giving me leave to speak on it, and I implore all members to continue to talk about this issue in their communities, with their loved ones, and with the schools that they visit as they go about their duties as representatives of their communities. Thank you.
The question is the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Wakehurst in reply.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm glad you're presiding over my first PID. It's an honour. I wasn't prepared to be choked up and a little bit teary, but I should have been, given that my wife said to me today that DV is almost like cancer, in that it's probably touched everyone in some way in this place, in this house. And today we've heard some stories that have been shared, I guess, and some experiences. And so on that, I do want to thank everyone for contributing to today's public interest debate. And we need as many champions in Parliament as possible working to eliminate domestic and family violence. Because honestly, we've only just touched the sides of this crisis in today's debate. So many more stats and so many more stories that we could all share. And so on that, can I thank personally those contributions, specifically the Minister, Member for Charleston, thank you. And as well as your awesome staff and their briefing and working with myself and my equally awesome staff on this PID. But the stuff that you introduced today in the Parliament, thank you. And it's the announcements that are made, the Women's Commission has been appointed, thank you. Can I say thank you to the member for Shell Harbour as well, the member for Balmain, the member for Wollondilly, the member for Oxley. Mike, thank you so much. I've really appreciated your support. And member for Cootamundra, amazing, and member for Hawkesbury, members for Bega. You blow me away. Brave doesn't even begin to explain or articulate how I feel and about both of you. And I certainly didn't expect that. We've heard a response from the government today and then the footprint from Staying Home Leaving Violence programs not to be revisited until 2025, and it's no surprise that I don't accept that. It's no surprise, and I'll continue to advocate on that, and I'll continue to provide advocacy on this, and it appears that it has maximum bang for buck, as we've heard, and I'm going to continue to push hard for that. But I just want to thank the opposition too and acknowledge their work of that previous government and how this has set a solid foundation for the current government, and I encourage them to continue to engage constructively in a bipartisan way, because honestly, this issue, politics and ego, has zero place on this horrific topic, and it's affecting so many. So I thank each of you and all of you for that. Can I thank our regional and rural MPs in particular? I really appreciate the emphasis on rural and region areas, particularly what you said, Member for Oxley. And the current government, I appreciate the current government is committed to dealing with this based on their announcements today, and we can do more and we will do more. As we know and we've heard, so much more needs to be done. We have 3.5 years together. We go to fundraisers, we go to we go to walks, fun runs, the like, and we raise money. We're in Parliament, we can take action, we can be serious, and we can get done. So let's do that and let's work together on this. It's important and appreciate the harrowing, gritty, realistic reality of domestic violence, and not to get lost in the sanitised language of plans, policies, programs and funding buckets. Lives are being lost and destroyed from a preventable cause at an acceptable rate, and frankly it's devastating. We can and must do more, and let's not forget our police. The Commissioner said recently the majority of their work is now DV related. How on earth is that happening? We need to support them. So finally, can I say thank you to all in attendance in the audience today who came to show their support. I want to name each one of you, but time does not permit. So please know that I will always have your back, and I'm in complete awe of what you guys do. I'm determined to do you all out of a job though, because there is no one solution, but it's abhorrent invasive crime. We must combat it, but I'm going to do you out of a job, because that means we've eliminated violence against women and children. Thank you.
The question is the public interest debate motion of the member for Wakehurst be agreed to. All of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The clerk will now read the next item of business.